She ran from the most powerful werewolf in existence on the night she was supposed to become his queen. 3 years later, Margriet van der Meer returned to the Moonstone Pack territory with a secret that would shake the very foundations of the supernatural world. A child with eyes that glowed like molten gold, carrying the bloodline of the Alpha King himself. But Hendrick de Vries hadn't spent 1,000 days searching for his escaped bride, only to let her slip through his fingers again. This is the story of a woman who chose freedom over a crown, and the king who would burn down kingdoms to have her back. Before we dive into this epic tale of destiny, danger, and undeniable attraction, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these stories. And here's something special. Tell me the city you're watching from so that I can send you a virtual hug. Drop your location in the comments right now. There's something magical about knowing this story is connecting us across distances, creating a community of supernatural romance lovers worldwide. Trust me, you'll want to be here for every twist in this journey. Now, let's begin where all great love stories do, with a choice that changes everything. The autumn moon hung heavy over the Moonstone Pack stronghold, casting silver shadows across the ancient stone fortress that had stood for 7 centuries. Inside the bridal chamber, Margriet van der Meer stared at her reflection in the gilded mirror, barely recognizing the woman draped in ancestral wedding silks that smelled of lavender and desperate expectations. She was 23 years old, daughter of the Beta family that had served the Alpha King's bloodline for generations. She should have been honored. She should have been grateful. She should have been many things, but all she felt was the suffocating weight of a destiny she'd never chosen. Hendrick de Vries. Even his name sent shivers down her spine, and not entirely from fear. The Alpha King was a legend wrapped in darkness, a wolf who'd ruled for 3 centuries through power, strategy, and an iron will that bent entire packs to his command. He was beautiful in the way winter storms are beautiful, magnificent, dangerous, and utterly devastating to anything caught in their path. Their engagement had been arranged before Margriet could even speak. Her parents, Peter and Annelies van der Meer, had been overjoyed when the Alpha King had confirmed the ancient betrothal. After all, what greater honor existed than to have their daughter become queen of all werewolves? But Margriet had spent her life watching what happened to those who loved Hendrick de Vries. His first mate had died in a war between packs 200 years ago. His second had succumbed to a mysterious illness that even pack healers couldn't cure. And his third? Well, the official story said she'd died in childbirth, but Margriet had heard the whispered rumors that she'd simply disappeared one winter night, driven mad by the isolation of loving a man who couldn't fully love anyone back. The Alpha King didn't do love. He did duty, legacy, and power. And Margriet would be damned if she became just another name in his tragic collection of dead queens. The ceremony had been scheduled for midnight, an old tradition when the moon's power was strongest. It was now 11:30. The fortress buzzed with celebration. Thousands of pack members gathered from across the territories to witness their king finally take another mate. Margriet's lady's maid, Saskia Vermeer, had helped her dress hours ago, weaving moonflowers into her long auburn hair and painting her lips the color of wild berries. Then Saskia had been dismissed, sent to join the festivities, leaving Margriet alone with her thoughts and her fear. Except Margriet hadn't spent those hours in passive acceptance. She'd spent them planning. 3 months ago, she'd met a witch at the border markets, a crone named Greech who dealt in forbidden magic and asked no questions. For a price, Greech had given Margriet 2 things. A cloaking spell that would hide her supernatural signature for exactly 12 hours, and the location of a safe house deep in human territory where the Alpha King's influence didn't reach. "You'll only get one chance," Greech had warned, her blind eyes somehow seeing everything. "He's an Alpha King for a reason. His senses are beyond anything you can imagine. But on your wedding night, during the ceremony itself, his attention will be divided between the ritual and the pack witnesses. That's your window. Miss it, and you'll never escape him." Margriet had paid with the only thing of value she owned. Her grandmother's silver bracelet, a van der Meer family heirloom that had been passed down for 6 generations. She'd cried when she'd handed it over, but freedom was worth more than sentiment. Now, as the clock crept toward midnight, Margriet pulled the small vial from where she'd hidden it in her undergarments. The cloaking potion looked innocuous, just amber liquid that smelled faintly of pine and something bitter. Her hands shook as she uncorked it. This was treason. This was unthinkable. This was the only way she'd ever live a life that was truly hers. She drank the potion in one swift gulp, fighting the urge to gag as it burned down her throat. Almost immediately, she felt the change, a strange numbness settling over her skin, as though she were being wrapped in fog. Her wolf, Brenna, whimpered inside her mind. "I know," Margriet whispered to her inner beast. "I know you want him. I know his wolf calls to yours. But we can't do this. We can't become another ghost in his collection." Brenna didn't argue, but Margriet felt her wolf's reluctance like a physical ache. The mate bond was already forming, tendrils of connection that had begun the moment Hendrick had placed his claiming mark on her wrist 3 months ago during the official betrothal. Fighting it felt like fighting gravity itself. But Margriet had never been good at accepting what she was told was inevitable. The wedding dress was too elaborate, too heavy for what she needed to do. Working quickly, she stripped down to her slip and reached for the servant's clothes she'd hidden behind the wardrobe. Simple brown wool that would help her blend into the crowd. She stuffed her hair under a scarf, scrubbed the berry stain from her lips, and took one last look at the bride in the mirror. "I'm sorry," she told that reflection. "But I won't be you." The fortress was a labyrinth of stone corridors, but Margriet had grown up exploring every hidden passage and forgotten stairwell. The ceremony was being held in the Great Hall, which meant the western wing would be relatively empty. The servants' entrance near the kitchens led directly to the outer gardens, and from there, the forest. Her heart hammered as she slipped into the corridor. Torches flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows that made her jump at nothing. In the distance, she could hear the drumming that signaled the ceremony's beginning. The haunting howls of celebrating wolves echoed through the stone. They would be calling for the bride soon. She moved like smoke through the passages, years of practice making her footsteps silent. 2 guards stood at the main corridor intersection, but they were focused outward, watching for external threats, not expecting danger from within. The cloaking spell worked perfectly. She slipped past them as though she were nothing more than air. The servants' wing was busier, staff rushing back and forth with platters of food and pitchers of mead for the feast that would follow the ceremony. Margriet grabbed an empty tray from a side table and held it in front of her like a shield, becoming just another faceless worker in the chaos. "You there!" A sharp voice cut through the noise. "Where do you think you're going?" Margriet's blood froze. She turned slowly to find the head housekeeper, Trinch Backer, glaring at her with suspicious eyes. "Kitchen said they needed more wine from the cellar," Margriet mumbled, keeping her face down and her voice rough. Trinch squinted, and for one horrible moment, Margriet thought the spell had failed. But then the older woman just waved her off irritably. "Well, hurry up about it. The king will want his feast prepared the moment the ceremony concludes." Margriet didn't need to be told twice. She ducked her head and rushed toward the back entrance, her pulse roaring in her ears. The moment she stepped outside into the cool night air, she wanted to collapse with relief. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. The gardens were lit with thousands of moonflower lanterns, creating a fairy tale landscape that would have been beautiful if it weren't a gilded cage. Margriet stayed in the shadows, moving along the hedge lines toward the eastern gate. It was the smallest entrance, rarely used except for deliveries, and tonight it would be her path to freedom. Just as she reached the gate, a howl split the night, not celebratory but questioning. Alert. They'd discovered she was missing. Margriet ran. The forest accepted her like an old friend, branches creating a canopy that blocked out the judgmental moon. Her wolf senses were dampened by the cloaking spell, but she didn't need supernatural abilities to know they'd be coming for her. The entire pack would be mobilized within minutes. Behind her, the howls multiplied. She could picture it perfectly. Hendrick standing at the altar in his ceremonial regalia, ancient runes painted across his chest, the crown of the Alpha King on his dark head. She could imagine his face when they'd told him his bride had vanished. Would he be angry, humiliated, or would he simply feel nothing? The thought made her stumble, catching herself against a tree trunk. Why did part of her hope he'd feel something? Why did her traitorous heart ache at the image of him standing alone? Because he's your mate, Brenna whispered. And you're breaking something sacred. Sacred to who? Margriet shot back. I never chose this. She pushed forward, letting anger fuel her flight. The safe house was 10 miles away, deep enough into human territory that wolf packs rarely ventured there. Greach had assured her there would be supplies, money, and fake identification papers that would let her disappear into human society. 12 hours. She just needed to stay hidden for 12 hours until the cloaking spell wore off. By then, she'd be far enough away that even the Alpha King couldn't track her. At least that was the theory. The forest grew denser, older trees with twisted roots that reached up like skeletal fingers. Margriet's lungs burned, her legs screaming in protest, but she didn't slow down. Behind her, the howls sounded closer. They were gaining. She should have known it wouldn't be easy. Should have known that Hendrick de Vries didn't become the most powerful alpha in werewolf history by accepting defeat. A massive black wolf burst through the underbrush to her left, missing her by inches. Margriet yelped and changed direction, her heart in her throat. The wolf, one of the king's elite guards, circled back, trying to herd her toward the rest of the hunting party. But Margriet had one advantage. She knew these woods. She'd explored them for years, finding all the hidden places where a rebellious beta's daughter could escape her duties. There was a ravine ahead, narrow enough to jump but wide enough that the larger wolves would have to find another way around. She pushed her exhausted body into a final sprint, launching herself across the gap with inches to spare. The guard wolf skidded to a halt at the edge, snarling in frustration. Margriet didn't wait to see what he'd do next. She plunged deeper into the forest. The howls fell away behind her. Either she'd lost them, or they were regrouping for a different strategy. Neither option was comforting. By the time she reached the safe house, dawn was painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. The building was exactly as Greach had described, a small cottage that looked abandoned, overgrown with ivy and surrounded by wild roses. But when Margriet pushed through the door, she found it clean and well-maintained inside. On the table sat a backpack filled with human clothes, cash, and a passport bearing her photo but a different name. Margriet van Amstel, born in Rotterdam, occupation, teacher. She allowed herself one sob of relief before locking the door and collapsing onto the narrow bed. Her whole body shook with exhaustion and residual fear. She'd done it. She'd actually escaped the Alpha King. So why did she feel like she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life? Margriet spent 3 days at the safe house, waiting for the cloaking spell to fully wear off and leave no magical trace. She knew Hendrick would have every witch in his territory searching for residual magic, trying to figure out how she'd hidden herself. But Greach's spell was old magic, the kind that left no signature once it faded. On the 4th day, she caught a bus to Amsterdam, then a train to Brussels, then another to Paris. She kept moving, never staying anywhere long enough to establish a pattern. She'd read enough about the Alpha King to know he was patient, methodical, and utterly relentless. He would be looking for her. She needed to become impossible to find. Margriet eventually settled in a small town in southern France, a place called Saint-Rémy-de-Provence where the sun was warm and wolves were nothing but fairy tales. She rented a room above a bakery, took a job teaching English to local children, and tried to build a life from the ashes of the one she'd left behind. But no matter how far she ran, she couldn't escape the pull of the mate bond. At night, she dreamed of golden eyes and a voice that rumbled like thunder. She dreamed of Hendrick searching for her, his face carved from stone and fury. She dreamed of the wedding that never was, of a crown she'd refused to wear. And she dreamed of the moment she'd sealed her fate, the night exactly 1 month before the planned wedding, when Hendrick had summoned her to his private chambers. Margriet had been terrified when the summons came. The Alpha King's private chambers were legendary, a place where policy was made, justice was dispensed, and enemies were destroyed. No one entered those rooms without invitation, and invitations were rarely given. She'd worn her finest dress, a deep green that brought out her eyes, though she didn't know why she cared. Hendrick de Vries had seen her perhaps a dozen times since confirming their betrothal, and each encounter had been formal, distant, as though she were just another piece on his political chessboard. His chambers were exactly what she'd expected, all dark wood and leather, shelves lined with ancient texts, maps of packed territories covering the walls. But there were unexpected touches too. Fresh flowers in a vase by the window, a worn quilt draped over the back of his chair that looked handmade, a small painting of a sunset that seemed oddly sentimental for a man rumored to have ice in his veins. Hendrick had been standing by the fireplace when she entered, his back to her, shoulders tense. He was tall, nearly 6.5 feet, with black hair that he wore longer than fashion dictated and a body that looked carved from granite. Even without seeing his face, he radiated power that made Margriet's wolf whimper with submission. "You asked to see me, my lord." Her voice had been steady despite her pounding heart. He'd turned then, and Margriet had forgotten how to breathe. His eyes were gold, not hazel or amber, but true metallic gold like coins in sunlight. His face was beautiful in a harsh, angular way, all strong bones and sharp edges. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from some long-ago battle. Margriet. Her name on his lips had sounded like a prayer and a curse. "We need to talk about the wedding." Her stomach had dropped. "Are you calling it off?" Something flickered in those golden eyes. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment. "Would you prefer that?" She'd opened her mouth to say yes, that she'd be relieved, grateful even. But the lie wouldn't come. Instead she'd asked, "Why did you choose me? You could have any wolf in any pack. Why honor a betrothal made before I was born?" Hendrick had moved closer, each step deliberate, predatory. "Do you know how mate bonds work, Margriet?" "Of course. The moon goddess pairs." "That's the pretty story we tell children," he interrupted. "The truth is more complicated. Yes, the goddess creates potential bonds. But for an alpha king, especially one who's lived as long as I have, those bonds are rare. I've walked this earth for 300 years. In all that time, I've felt the mate pull exactly 4 times. 4 times. 4 dead queens. I don't want to be the 5th, Margriet had whispered. His jaw had tightened. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to feel this pull again, knowing what it costs?" He'd closed the distance between them, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "But the bond doesn't care what we want. It just is." Then he'd done something that shocked her. He'd taken her hand gently and pressed it against his chest. His heart had been racing, matching her own frantic rhythm. "I know you're afraid of me," he'd said quietly. "I know the stories. Some of them are even true. But I swear to you, Margriet van der Meer, I will protect you with everything I am. You will not become another tragedy. I won't allow it." And then he'd kissed her. It hadn't been gentle or tentative. It had been consuming, devastating, a kiss that tasted like fate and fire. Margriet had felt the mate bond snap into place like a lock turning, binding them together in a way that transcended choice or logic. When he'd finally pulled away, they'd both been shaking. "1 month, Hendrick had said, his voice rough. "Give me 1 month to show you that this marriage doesn't have to be a cage. And if, on our wedding day, you truly want to refuse me, I'll let you go." It had been a lie, of course. Or maybe not. Maybe he'd truly meant it in that moment. But Margriet had known, even as she'd nodded agreement, that she couldn't take that chance. Couldn't risk that one more kiss, one more touch, would make her unable to leave. So she'd made her plans and prepared her escape, even as her heart screamed at her to stay. 3 years later, Margriet sat in a doctor's office in Marseille, staring at the ultrasound image that would change everything. She'd known something was wrong, or right, depending on perspective, for weeks. The exhaustion, the nausea, the the strange heightening of her senses despite not having shifted into her wolf form in over 2 years. She'd been afraid to hope, afraid to confirm what her body was telling her. But there it was on the screen, a tiny fluttering heartbeat, proof of the impossible. About 7 weeks along, the doctor had said cheerfully, unaware that his patient was currently experiencing a complete existential crisis. Everything looks healthy. Do you have any questions? Only about 1 million. Like, how was this possible? She and Hendrick had never consummated their relationship. They'd kissed exactly once. Werewolf pregnancies didn't happen from kisses, even mate bond kisses. Except, there was one possibility. One consequence of a true mate bond that was so rare. Most wolves thought it was mythology. Soul conception. When a mate bond was strong enough, powerful enough, the connection between souls could create life without physical intimacy. It had been documented perhaps 12 times in werewolf history, always with alpha bloodlines, always with bonds that transcended normal parameters. Margriet had walked out of that doctor's office in a daze, one hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach. Inside her womb grew the child of the Alpha King, conceived from nothing but a single kiss and a bond she tried desperately to deny. She should have been terrified. Should have been planning how to hide this from Hendrick, how to raise a royal heir in secret. Instead she'd felt complete. As though something that had been missing for 3 years had finally clicked into place. Brenna, her wolf, had been ecstatic, howling with joy in her mind. "Our pup," she'd crooned. "Our mate's pup." "He's not our mate anymore," Margriet had argued, but even she didn't believe it. The bond had never broken. She'd run from the wedding, hidden herself in the human world, but the connection remained, stretched thin but unbreakable. The pregnancy progressed quickly. Alpha pups always did. By the time Margriet was 3 months along, she looked 6 months pregnant. She told her employer she was taking extended leave for a family emergency, and retreated to a small cottage in the Provençal countryside. She told herself she was protecting the child. Told herself she was giving her son. She knew somehow it was a boy, the peaceful life she'd wanted for herself. But in her heart, she knew the truth. She was stalling, trying to figure out how to face the reality she'd created. Because sooner or later, Hendrick would find out. And when he did, nothing in heaven or earth would keep him from claiming his heir. The baby was born on a winter morning during the full moon, with only a midwife named Celeste in attendance. Labor had been brutal. Alpha pups were larger, stronger, fought their way into the world like warriors. Margriet had screamed herself hoarse, certain she was going to die. But then they'd placed him in her arms, and nothing else mattered. He was perfect. Impossibly perfect, with a shock of black hair and eyes that would eventually turn gold like his father's but were currently that startling blue of all newborns. He was large for an infant, already showing the signs of the powerful wolf he'd become. "What will you name him?" Celeste had asked. Margriet had traced one finger over her son's tiny hand, marveling as his fingers wrapped around hers with surprising strength. "Dirk," she'd whispered. "Dirk van der Meer. Not de Vries." She couldn't bring herself to give him his father's surname, as though that small omission could somehow keep him hers alone. But even as she made that choice, she knew it was temporary. Dirk bore the mark of his heritage in every cell of his body. His aura, even as an infant, hummed with power. His eyes, when they finally changed color at 3 months old, blazed with that unmistakable de Vries gold. He was the Alpha King's son, and no amount of wishful thinking would change that. Margriet spent the next 2.5 years in that countryside cottage, watching her son grow at an alarming rate. Alpha children developed faster than normal wolf pups, and Dirk was no exception. By his first birthday he was walking and speaking simple sentences. By 2, he could shift into his wolf form, something that shouldn't be possible until puberty. The first time he'd shifted, Margriet had nearly fainted. She'd been reading him a bedtime story when suddenly her toddler had vanished, replaced by a small black wolf pup with blazing gold eyes. He'd yipped excitedly and pounced on his stuffed rabbit, clearly delighted with this new ability. "Dirk, shift back," Margriet had commanded, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "Come back to Mama." He'd cocked his head, wolf pup curiosity, then shimmered back into his human form. "Fun, Mama. Do again." "No, sweetheart. That's something we need to keep secret, okay? Don't shift where anyone can see." Even at 2 years old, Dirk had understood the weight in her voice. He'd nodded solemnly, too intelligent for his age. "Secret. Okay, Mama." But secrets like this couldn't last forever. And Margriet's time had run out 3 months later when a traveling merchant had come to the cottage selling wares. She'd been outside hanging laundry while Dirk played in the garden. The merchant, an older human man named Bernard, had been friendly, too chatty. He'd asked too many questions about where Margriet was from, whether she had family nearby. Had she heard about the massive reward being offered for information about a missing woman? Margriet's blood had frozen. Reward. Bernard had pulled out a creased paper from his coat, a wanted poster essentially, though it was couched in gentler terms. "Missing person," he'd said. "Some rich family looking for their daughter. Went missing on her wedding day 3 years ago. The husband's offering a fortune to anyone who can help find her." The poster had shown a sketch of Margriet's face, accurate enough to be recognizable. And at the bottom, in bold letters, "Contact Hendrick de Vries with any information." He'd never stopped looking. 3 years and he'd never stopped. "Haven't seen anyone like that," Margriet had managed, her voice amazingly steady. "But I'll keep an eye out." Bernard had thanked her and left, but the damage was done. If wanted posters were reaching this far into human territory, it was only a matter of time before someone made the connection. And then Dirk had toddled over, his gold eyes bright. "Mama, who was that man?" Those gold eyes. So distinctive. So unmistakably royal. Margriet made her decision that night. She couldn't keep running forever. Couldn't keep Dirk hidden like a shameful secret. He was the Alpha King's heir, and denying him his birthright was no better than the cage she'd been running from. Besides, the selfish truth she'd been avoiding for 3 years. She missed Hendrick. Missed him with an ache that never faded, a longing that haunted her dreams. The mate bond pulled at her constantly, a compass pointing home. It was time to stop running. She packed their few belongings, burned anything that could be traced, and used the last of her saved money to book passage back to the Netherlands. Back to the Moonstone Pack territory. Back to the man she'd left standing at the altar. The journey took 2 days. Margriet spent every moment fighting panic, rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd explain. "Sorry I ran away on our wedding night wasn't going to cut it." Neither was surprise. "You're a father." As the train pulled into the station nearest to Pack territory, Margriet felt the mate bond surge, stronger than it had been in 3 years. Hendrick was close, and if she could feel him, he could definitely feel her. She'd barely stepped onto the platform when wolves surrounded them. They appeared from nowhere, 6 massive warriors in human form, moving with predatory grace. The lead warrior, a scarred man with steel-gray hair, stepped forward with his hand on his weapon. "Margriet van der Meer," he said, voice hard. "You will come with us. The Alpha King will see you now." Dirk pressed against her leg, his small body trembling. At nearly 3 years old, he was smart enough to sense danger. "Mama!" The warrior's eyes all locked onto Dirk at once, and Margriet saw the exact moment they recognized what he was. Saw their expressions shift from hostility to shock to something like awe. "Mother's mercy," one of them breathed. He's the heir," another finished. The lead warrior's face had gone pale. "We need to get them to the king immediately. And someone contact Counselor van der Meer. Tell him his daughter is alive." They were escorted to a black SUV with tinted windows, treated with a bizarre combination of imprisonment and reverence. Margriet held Dirk close, murmuring reassurances even as her own heart raced. The Moonstone Pack stronghold looked exactly as she remembered. Ancient stone walls that had withstood centuries, towers that reached toward the sky like claws. It had been her home once. Now it felt like a fortress preparing for war. News of their arrival had spread quickly. Wolves lined the courtyard, hundreds of them, all staring with wide eyes at the woman who'd committed the unthinkable crime of rejecting their king. And standing at the top of the main steps, arms crossed and face carved from granite, was Hendrick de Vries. 3 years had passed, but he looked unchanged, still impossibly tall, still radiating that crushing authority. His black hair was perhaps a bit longer, and there were lines around his eyes that she didn't remember. But his golden eyes were the same, burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then his gaze dropped to Dirk, and the world seemed to stop. The little boy stared back, gold eyes meeting gold, and something passed between them. Recognition, instinct, blood calling to blood. "Papa," Dirk said tentatively, and Margriet wanted to die. She'd never told him about his father, never shown him pictures or spoken the name. But somehow, in that way that supernatural children just knew things, Dirk understood exactly who this man was. Hendrick descended the steps slowly, like a man in a dream. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Margriet could smell pine and leather and that indefinable scent that was purely him. Close enough that the mate bond roared to life, trying to pull her into his arms. "You have," he said carefully, each word precisely controlled, "approximately 30 seconds to explain to me why I shouldn't throw you in the dungeons for treason." "Because I brought you your son," Margriet said, lifting her chin. "And because you promised 3 years ago that if I truly wanted to refuse you, you'd let me go." His jaw clenched. "You didn't refuse me at the altar, Margriet. You ran like a coward in the night." The words stung because they were true. But Margriet had spent 3 years finding her courage, and she wouldn't back down now. "You're right," she said clearly. "I was a coward. I was terrified of becoming another dead queen, another tragedy in your collection. So I ran. And I'm sorry for the humiliation that caused you, for the dishonor. But I'm not sorry I left, because if I hadn't, we wouldn't have him." She placed her hand on Dirk's shoulder, anchoring herself with his solid warmth. Hendrick's eyes hadn't left the child. "How?" "Soul conception. The mate bond is strong enough that—" "I know what soul conception is," he interrupted, his voice rough. "I asked how you could keep this from me. How you could hide my son for 3 years. The same way you kept 3 dead queens from breaking you," Margriet shot back. "Self-preservation." The crowd around them had gone completely silent, every wolf straining to hear this confrontation. Hendrick seemed to remember they had an audience. His face hardened. "Everyone out," he commanded. "Except Counselor Meer. I'll deal with your daughter's parents shortly. The rest of you go. Now." Wolves scattered like leaves in wind. Within seconds, the courtyard was empty except for Hendrick, Margriet, Dirk, and a handful of high-ranking officials who were probably too important to dismiss. Hendrick crouched down to Dirk's level, and Margriet saw her son's eyes widen. Up close, the resemblance between father and son was startling. The same strong features, the same gold eyes, even the same stubborn set to their jaws. "Hello, Dirk," Hendrick said softly. "I'm my papa," Dirk finished, then added shyly. "Mama says I have your eyes." Something cracked in Hendrick's expression. Grief, joy, rage, love, all tangled together. "She's right. We have the same eyes." He held out one large hand. "Will you come with me? I'd like to show you your home." Dirk looked up at Margriet for permission. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Her son took his father's hand with complete trust, and the sight of them together, the tiny hand in the massive one, both with matching gold eyes, made tears burn in Margriet's throat. Hendrick stood, still holding Dirk's hand, and turned that burning gaze back to Margriet. "We're not done," he said quietly. "Not even close. But first I'm going to meet my son. Then—" His smile was sharp enough to cut. "Then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about duty, honor, and the consequences of running from an alpha king." The next few hours passed in a surreal blur. Hendrick had taken Dirk on a tour of the stronghold, showing him centuries of pack history, introducing him to wolves who would serve him when he eventually took his place as heir. Margriet had been escorted to a guest room, locked, she noted, and left to contemplate her fate. Her parents had come immediately, of course. Peter and Annelies van der Meer were torn between joy at finding their daughter alive and horror at what she'd done. Her mother had sobbed, her father had lectured, and Margriet had endured both with numb acceptance. "You've shamed our family," Peter had said, his face haggard. "The Alpha King is being remarkably merciful by not executing us all for your betrayal." "He won't kill his son's family," Margriet had replied with more confidence than she felt. "And he won't kill me either." "Don't be so certain," her mother had warned. 3 years, Margriet. He spent 3 years searching for you. Do you have any idea what that did to him? What it did to the pack? There were wolves who said he was cursed, that the moon goddess herself had abandoned him. He aged a decade in 3 years. The words had hit harder than Margriet expected. She'd thought about Hendrik's anger, his pride, his fury at being left. She hadn't let herself think about his pain. Now, sitting alone in the locked room as evening fell, she forced herself to consider it. Hendrick de Vries, the unshakable Alpha King, humiliated before every pack in the supernatural world. His fourth mate bond, and she'd rejected him publicly in the worst way possible. The mate bond pulsed, and she knew he was coming before she heard the footsteps. The door opened without a knock. Hendrik filled the doorway, still wearing the formal clothes from earlier but looking rumpled now, tired. Behind him, the hallway was empty. He'd sent away his guards. "He's asleep," Hendrik said without preamble. "I had to read him 4 stories." He insisted on one about a brave little wolf who saved his pack. Despite everything, Margriet smiled. "That's his favorite. I've read it 100 times. Hendrik stepped inside and closed the door. The room suddenly felt much smaller. "You've done well with him. He's extraordinary. He has extraordinary blood. He has an extraordinary mother." Hendrik moved to the window, looking out over the moonlit territory. "Soul conception. Do you know how rare that is? How powerful a bond has to be for that to happen?" "I researched it," Margriet admitted. "After I found out I was pregnant. There are only 13 documented cases in werewolf history. 14 now." He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her chest tight. "Do you understand what it means, Margriet? Soul conception only happens when 2 souls are so perfectly matched, so deeply connected, that they can create life from sheer wanting. We made a child from a single kiss because our bond was strong enough to will him into existence." "I know. Then explain to me," his voice dropped dangerously low, "how you could run from that, how you could feel what I felt, what I know you felt, and still choose to leave." Margriet stood, meeting his anger with her own. "Because that bond terrified me. Because every woman who's ever been your mate has died, and I didn't want to be next." "You think I don't know that?" Hendrik's control finally cracked. "You think I haven't spent 300 years haunted by their faces? Elsk Treinch Imk. I remember every detail, every moment. And when the mate bond pulled me to you, I tried to fight it. Tried to ignore it. Because I knew the cost." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping so close she had to tilt her head back to see his face. "But I couldn't fight it," he continued, voice raw. "Couldn't stay away. So I made myself a promise. This time would be different. This time I would protect my mate with everything I had. I would keep you safe even if it killed me." "And how were you planning to do that?" Margriet challenged. "Your first mate died in a war. Your second from illness. Your third in childbirth, or so the story goes. How exactly do you fight fate?" "By changing the pattern." Hendrik's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Elsk died because I brought her into battle. After that, I kept Treinch locked away, protected, sheltered, and she withered like a plant without sun. Imk I tried to give freedom, but I was distant, afraid to love her fully. She died giving birth to a stillborn child, and I think she gave up because she knew I'd never truly loved her." His golden eyes held Margriet's, intense and unwavering. "With you, I was going to do everything different. Give you protection without imprisonment. Give you love without suffocation. Give you choice within the bond. That's what I meant when I said I'd let you go if you refused me at the altar. I meant I'd give you the freedom to choose every single day to stay." Margriet's breath caught. "You never told me any of that. Because I'm 300 years old and apparently still terrible at communication." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I thought I had time. Thought I could show you through actions instead of words. And then you vanished, and I realized I'd already failed you." "Hendrick!" She didn't know what to say. 3 years of certainty, of believing she'd made the right choice, suddenly felt shaky. "When you disappeared," he continued, "I searched everywhere. Emptied the treasury hiring trackers, witches, seers. Sent scouts into every territory, human and supernatural. I neglected my duties, my pack, my responsibilities, all searching for a woman who clearly didn't want to be found." He laughed bitterly. "My counsel told me to give up, to declare you dead and move on. But I couldn't because the mate bond was still there. I could feel you, distant and faint but alive. Do you know what that's like? Knowing your mate is out there somewhere, but choosing to stay away." Tears burned in Margriet's eyes. "I thought I was saving myself. I didn't think about what it would do to you. I know. You were young, scared. You'd been told your whole life that being my mate was a death sentence." His hand dropped from her face. "But Margriet, running from me didn't keep you safe. You were alone in human territory, unprotected, pregnant with an alpha heir. Do you have any idea how many things could have gone wrong? I managed. You shouldn't have had to just manage." The anger flared again. "You should have had healers, guards, family. Dirk should have been born in the stronghold, surrounded by pack, with every resource at his disposal. Instead, he was born in some human cottage with only a midwife present. What if there had been complications? What if he'd shifted during delivery? You could have both died, and I would have never known." The truth of it hit Margriet like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on her own fears that she hadn't considered the risks she was taking. Alpha births were dangerous. Dirk's early shifting could have exposed them both. 1,000 things could have gone catastrophically wrong. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You're right. I was selfish." "No." Hendrick's voice softened. "You were scared. There's a difference." He took a deep breath, visibly gathering himself. "I didn't come here to berate you. I came to tell you what happens next." Margriet braced herself. "Are you going to imprison me? Don't be absurd. You're the mother of my child and my mate. But there will be consequences." He began counting on his fingers. "First, you will undergo formal apology to the pack. You dishonored them with your flight, and that requires public acknowledgement." She nodded. That was fair. "Second, you will complete the wedding ceremony." Margriet's head snapped up. "What? We're still betrothed, Margriet. That bond was never broken. And now that you've borne my heir, it's essential that he be legitimate in the eyes of every pack. That requires us to be formally mated. You're forcing me to marry you." His jaw tightened. "I'm requiring you to fulfill a commitment you made the day you were born into the Vandermeer line. But unlike last time, you'll have full knowledge of what you're agreeing to. I'll give you 2 weeks to decide. If, at the end of that time, you genuinely wish to refuse the bond, I'll—" He paused, pain flashing across his face. "I'll release you. I'll claim Dirk as my heir, and you can leave. You'll have an estate, money, protection, everything you need. But you can go. And if I stay, then you become my queen, my true mate. And I spend the rest of my very long life proving to you that I can keep you safe." He stepped closer again. "But I won't lie to you, Margriet. There are no guarantees. Fate seems to have it out for my mates. Staying with me might mean danger. It will definitely mean responsibility, pressure, and scrutiny. It won't be easy. And what do you want? Margriet asked. If I gave you real choice, Hendrick, what would you choose? His control finally shattered. He pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, and kissed her with 3 years of pent-up longing, rage, and desperate need. It was nothing like their first kiss. This was raw, claiming, a statement of possession and plea for acceptance all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hendrick pressed his forehead against hers. I choose you, he said hoarsely. I have always chosen you. I will always choose you. Even when you run, even when you break my heart, even when you make me search the entire world just to find you again. You're mine, Margriet Meer. You have been since the moment the mate bond snapped into place. And if you'll let me, I'll spend eternity proving I can be worthy of you. Margriet's hands fisted in his shirt. The mate bond sang between them, stronger than ever, a living thing that demanded acknowledgement. I'm still scared, she admitted. Good. Fear keeps us careful. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. But don't let fear make your decisions for you. 2 weeks, Margriet. Get to know me. Let me court you properly. Let me show you what our life could be. And then decide. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of Margriet's life. She'd returned to the Moonstone Pack as a traitor and was being treated like visiting royalty, albeit royalty under very polite house arrest. Hendrick had been serious about courting her. Every morning, she woke to fresh flowers in her room. Not roses, but wildflowers from the forest where they'd first walked together during their betrothal period. Every afternoon, he took her and Dirk on excursions around the territory, showing them the packlands, introducing them to key families. And every evening they had dinner together. Just the 3 of them like a real family. Watching Hendrick with Dirk was what truly broke down Margriet's walls. The fearsome Alpha King became someone completely different around his son. Patient, playful, endlessly gentle. He taught Dirk to shift properly, to control his wolf instead of being controlled by it. He told him stories about pack history, about legendary wolves who'd shaped their world. Your great-great-great-grandfather was named Cornelis, Hendrick said one evening. Dirk curled up on his lap during story time. He was the one who established the Moonstone Pack over 500 years ago. He believed that wolves should protect humans, not prey on them. That made him unpopular with other packs. But he was right, Dirk asked. He was right. And he was brave enough to stand alone until others joined him. Hendrick's eyes met Margriet's over their son's head. Sometimes the right choice is the hard one. Sometimes being brave means standing for what you believe, even when everyone else tells you you're wrong. The message wasn't subtle, but Margriet appreciated it anyway. During the days when Hendrick was occupied with pack business, Margriet explored the stronghold. It was different than she remembered, or maybe she was different. The walls that had felt like a prison now felt like protection. The formality that had seemed stifling now felt like order in a chaotic world. She spent time with her parents, rebuilding bridges that had been burned. She reconnected with old friends from her youth, women who were now mated and raising their own pups. And slowly, carefully, she began to see what she'd given up. Community, belonging, purpose. In the human world, she'd been adrift, always looking over her shoulder, never able to put down roots. Here she was the daughter of the Beta family, mother of the heir, and potentially the future queen. Here she mattered. But it was the night of the full moon, 1 week into her 2-week trial period, that everything truly changed. Hendrick had asked her to accompany him to the pack's lunar celebration, a monthly gathering where wolves ran together under the moon's light. Margriet had attended these as a child but never as an adult. Never as the Alpha King's mate. You don't have to shift if you don't want to, Hendrick told her as they walked to the ceremonial grounds. Many wolves just observe. But Margriet's wolf, Brenna, was practically howling to be free. 3 years of suppression, of hiding her true nature in the human world, and Brenna was done with cages. I want to run, Margriet said. Hendrick's eyes flashed gold. Then run with me. The transformation was ecstasy and agony, bones reshaping, muscles reforming. Margriet's wolf was smaller than most, her coat a rich auburn that matched her human hair. But she was fast and clever, built for endurance rather than brute strength. Hendrick's wolf was massive, black as midnight with those unmistakable gold eyes. He was the largest wolf Margriet had ever seen, radiating such power that every other wolf instinctively gave him space. Their wolves recognized each other instantly. Hendrick's massive black wolf approached Margriet's auburn one carefully, respectfully, and touched his nose to hers. The mate bond exploded between them, stronger in wolf form where instinct ruled over fear. Then they ran. The pack followed, but Margriet was only aware of Hendrick. They raced through the forest, leaping over fallen logs, splashing through streams, hunting together in perfect synchronization. Her wolf knew his wolf, moved with his wolf, fit against his wolf like two pieces of a puzzle. This was what she'd been denying herself for 3 years. This perfect unity, this feeling of absolute rightness. When they finally stopped at a cliff overlooking the pack lands, both panting from exertion, Hendrick shifted back to human form. Margriet followed suit, and suddenly they were standing naked under the moon, skin still tingling from the change. "This is what we are," Hendrick said quietly. "Not the politics, not the ceremonies, not the titles. Two wolves who find perfect harmony in running together." Margriet looked out over the territory spread below them, forests and fields, the stronghold's lights twinkling in the distance, hundreds of wolves who looked to them for leadership. "I was wrong," she said finally. 3 years ago, I thought staying would mean losing myself. But running meant losing this. Losing us. Hendrick moved behind her, arms circling her waist, his chin resting on top of her head. "You weren't wrong to be scared. You were wrong to think you had to face that fear alone." "I'm still scared," Margriet admitted. "Your other mates are gone and I grieve them. But they're not you." He turned her to face him. "You're stronger than Elsk, more vibrant than Trinch, braver than Imk. You ran from the most powerful wolf in existence and survived alone for 3 years. You bore my child without pack support and raised him to be extraordinary. You're not going to wither or break, Margriet. You're going to thrive. How can you be so sure? Because you already did. You survived the impossible. Everything else is just details." He cupped her face in both hands. "I can't promise you won't face danger. I can't promise fate won't test us. But I can promise I'll face it with you. No more keeping you locked away for your own good. No more distance to protect my heart. If you'll have me, I'll give you everything. Partnership, equality, love. Real love, not just duty." Margriet felt the last of her walls crumbling. "You really mean that? I spent 3 years in hell without you. I'm not wasting another moment." He kissed her softly, sweetly, a promise rather than a claim. "Marry me, Margriet. Not because of duty or tradition or our son. Marry me because we're meant to be together. Because our souls want each other badly enough to create life from nothing. Because I love you more than I've loved anyone in 3 centuries, and I hope, you might love me too." And there it was. The truth she'd been running from all along. "I do love you," Margriet whispered. "I think I loved you from that first kiss. That's why I ran. Because loving you felt like jumping off a cliff with no idea if I'd survive the fall." Hendrick smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "So let's jump together. And if we fall, at least we'll fall side by side." The second attempt at their wedding was nothing like the first. Where the first ceremony had been planned for months, a massive political spectacle with representatives from every pack, this one was smaller, more intimate. Just the Moonstone Pack, Margriet's family, and a few key allies. Where the first had been scheduled for midnight with all the ancient pomp and ritual, this one took place at dawn as the sun rose over the pack lands. A new beginning in every sense. And where the first had featured a terrified bride planning her escape, this one had Margriet walking down the aisle with her head high and her heart certain. She wore a simpler dress this time, white silk that flowed like water, with wildflowers woven through her unbound hair. Dirk walked beside her, holding her hand, his small face serious with the weight of his role. "You look pretty, Mama," he whispered. "Thank you, sweetheart. Are you ready to watch me marry your papa?" "Yes." His gold eyes sparkled with excitement. "Then we're a real family." "We're already a real family," Margriet assured him. "This just makes it official." Hendrick waited at the altar, dressed in ceremonial robes that bore the silver wolf insignia of his house. His hair was pulled back, the scar on his face somehow making him more handsome rather than less. His eyes tracked Margriet's every step, burning with an intensity that made her skin flush. When she reached him, Dirk carefully transferred her hand to his father's, then scampered off to sit with his grandparents. Hendrick's fingers interlaced with Margriet's, warm and solid. "You came," he said softly, for her ears only. "I came," she confirmed. "No running this time." "No running," he agreed. Then louder to the assembled pack. "3 years ago, I stood at an altar and waited for a bride who never came. Today, she's here not because of duty or tradition, but because she chose to be. That choice means more to me than any forced bond ever could." He turned to face Margriet fully, still holding her hand. "Margriet Meer, I vow to protect you without imprisoning you, to love you without consuming you, to stand beside you as partner, not above you as master. I vow to be worthy of the choice you're making today. And I vow that our story will not end in tragedy, but in triumph." Margriet's throat tightened with emotion. "Hendrick de Vries, I vow to trust you with my heart, even though fear tells me not to. To stand with you through whatever challenges come. To build a life together that honors both our strengths. I vow to never run from you again, not because I'm trapped, but because I choose to stay. And I vow that our love will be stronger than fate, fiercer than fear, and eternal as the moon above." The pack elder performing the ceremony, an ancient wolf named Govert, raised his hands. "Then by the power vested in me by pack law and the moon goddess herself, I declare you mated for life. Let no wolf put asunder what the goddess has joined." Hendrick pulled Margriet close and kissed her as the pack erupted in howls of celebration. The mate bond, which had been stretched thin for 3 years, suddenly snapped fully into place, not just connected but fused, unbreakable. Margriet gasped against his lips as the full force of it hit her. She could feel Hendrick's emotions now. His relief, his joy, his absolute certainty. And underneath it all, a love so deep and fierce it took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, she was crying. "Happy tears?" Hendrick asked, wiping them away gently. "Very happy tears." She laughed through the emotion. "I can feel you. Everything you feel. And I feel you. Your courage. Your strength. Your love." He kissed her forehead. "We're truly one now, Margriet. In every way that matters." The celebration that followed was joyous in a way the first planned wedding never could have been. There was music and dancing, endless food, wolves shifting and running in pure happiness. Dirk was passed from person to person, showered with gifts and attention as the official heir to the Moonstone Pack. As evening fell, Hendrick and Margriet finally managed to steal away from the festivities. They walked to the same cliff where they'd stood during the full moon run, looking out over their territory. "Do you regret it?" Hendrick asked. "Giving up your freedom?" Margriet considered the question seriously. "I don't think I ever really had freedom when I was running. I was always looking over my shoulder, always afraid. This." She gestured to the lands below. "This is freedom. Knowing where I belong. Having purpose. Being part of something larger than myself. Even knowing the risks. Especially knowing the risks." She turned to face him. "You told me once that your other mates died for different reasons. But I think I know why I'll be different." "Why?" "Because I choose this with full knowledge. I'm not being protected from the truth or sheltered from reality. I'm walking into this partnership with open eyes, ready to fight for it. Your other mates didn't have that choice. Hendrick was quiet for a moment. You're right. I tried to shield them, and that weakness is what destroyed us. But you. He pulled her close. You don't need shielding. You need a partner. And that's what I'll be. Good. Because I have plans, you know. Margriet smiled mischievously. Reforms I want to make. Changes to how we treat low-ranking pack members. Education programs for pups. Better integration with neighboring packs. My queen has political ambitions. Hendrick's eyes gleamed with approval. I should have known you wouldn't be content with just looking pretty on a throne. If you wanted a decorative queen, you chose the wrong woman. No, he said seriously. I chose exactly right. They stood together as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Two wolves who'd found their way to each other despite every obstacle. Behind them they could hear the pack still celebrating. Ahead of them lay years, decades, maybe centuries of challenges and triumphs. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. 5 years after their wedding, the Moonstone Pack had transformed into something unprecedented in werewolf history. A pack that balanced tradition with progress, strength with compassion. Queen Margriet had been true to her word. She'd established schools throughout the territory, ensuring every pup received education regardless of their family's rank. She'd created treaties with neighboring packs that emphasized cooperation over competition. And most controversially, she'd opened diplomatic relations with several human governments, slowly working to bridge the gap between supernatural and mundane worlds. Not everyone approved. There were wolves who grumbled about the old ways being abandoned, who thought their queen was too bold, too radical. But they couldn't argue with results. The Moonstone Pack was thriving like never before. Dirk, now 8 years old but with the physical development of a 12-year-old due to his alpha bloodline, was everything an heir should be. He was being trained in combat strategy and diplomacy. But more importantly, he was learning compassion, justice, and the weight of responsibility. Papa says a good king protects his pack, Dirk told his mother one afternoon as they walked through the stronghold gardens. But you say a good king also listens to his pack. Which is right? Both, Margriet said, squeezing his hand. Your father protects with strength. I protect with understanding. You'll need both to be a great king someday. Will you teach me? Every day, sweetheart. Every single day. They found Hendrick in his office, surrounded by papers and maps as usual. But he looked up with a smile when they entered. All the softness that only his family ever saw. There are my 2 favorite wolves, he said, pushing the papers aside. Come rescue me from bureaucracy. Dirk launched himself at his father, who caught him easily. Mama says I need to learn both strength and understanding. Your mama is very wise. Hendrick met Margriet's eyes over their son's head, and the love there still made her breath catch. It's one of the many reasons I married her. Again, Dirk demanded. Tell the story again about how Mama ran away and you had to find her. It had become Dirk's favorite bedtime story, a sanitized version of events that focused on the romance rather than the scandal. Margriet had initially been uncomfortable with it, but Hendrick had insisted. Our son should know the truth, he'd said. That real love isn't always easy. That sometimes people make mistakes. That what matters is finding your way back to each other. Now, Hendrick settled Dirk on his lap and began the familiar tale. Once upon a time, there was a very stubborn queen who ran away on her wedding night. Margriet listened with a smile, marveling at how their story had become legend. The Alpha King and the runaway bride. It would be told for generations, a reminder that even the most powerful wolves were still capable of very human mistakes and very powerful love. That evening, after Dirk was asleep and the stronghold had quieted for the night, Margriet and Hendrick stood on their private balcony. The moon was full again, calling to their wolves, but tonight they stayed in human form, content just to be together. Do you ever think about that night? Margriet asked. The night I ran. Sometimes. Hendrick's arm tightened around her waist. Usually when I wake up and need to confirm you're still here. I'm not going anywhere. I know. But 3 years of searching leaves scars. Margriet turned in his arms to face him. Then let me spend the rest of our very long lives healing those scars. Let me prove every single day that I choose you. That I choose this. That I choose us. You already prove it, Hendrick said softly. Every reform you fight for, every treaty you negotiate, every moment you stand beside me as true partner. You prove it. You're not just my queen, Margriet. You're my equal. My other half. The best decision I never actually got to make. She laughed. What do you mean? The mate bond chose you for me before I ever had a say. First, I resented that. Resented that I couldn't control even this. But now, he kissed her gently. Now I'm grateful. Because left to my own devices, I probably would have chosen wrong. Would have picked someone appropriate and suitable and utterly wrong for me. The goddess knew what I needed even when I didn't. A woman who would run away on her wedding night. A woman brave enough to run away when she was scared, and brave enough to come back when she was ready. A woman who would challenge me, stand up to me, refuse to let me hide behind walls. His gold eyes gleamed in the moonlight. A woman who would give me a son, build a better pack, and love me despite every reason not to. Margriet felt tears prickling again. 5 years, and he still had the power to undo her with words. I love you, she said simply. I loved you when I ran from you. I loved you when I was hiding from you. And I'll love you for every century the moon goddess grants us. Centuries, Hendrick repeated thoughtfully. With alpha bloodlines we could have 500 years together. Maybe more. That's a long time to put up with me. Not nearly long enough. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly. A kiss that still contained all the passion of their first and all the certainty of their 1000th. When he pulled back, his expression was serious. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for giving us a chance. Thank you for choosing me. Always, Margriet promised. In every life, in every choice, in every moment, I choose you. Behind them, through the open balcony doors, they heard small footsteps. Dirk appeared in his nightclothes, clutching his stuffed wolf. Couldn't sleep? Margriet asked. Their son shook his head, padding over to them. Had a dream. You were gone again, Mama. Hendrick scooped him up, settling Dirk between them. Your mama's not going anywhere, son. She promised. Forever. Forever, Margriet confirmed, pressing a kiss to his dark hair. You're stuck with both of us. Dirk relaxed against his father's chest, reassured. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep. Hendrick and Margriet stood there under the full moon, holding their son, exactly where they were meant to be. The Alpha King and his queen, who had run from destiny only to discover that some bonds couldn't be broken. They could only be denied or embraced. And embraced, they became something powerful enough to reshape the world. This was their story. Not a tragedy but a triumph. Not an ending, but a beginning that would echo through generations. And every night, under that same faithful moon, wolves would tell the tale of the woman brave enough to run from love, and wise enough to return to it. So there you have it, the story of Margriet and Hendrick, the runaway bride and the Alpha King who never stopped searching. A love that began with fear and blossomed into something unbreakable. A reminder that the right choice isn't always the easy one, and that sometimes you have to run away to discover what's worth running back to. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the pull of that mate bond, if you were rooting for them to find their way back to each other, please hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves supernatural romance. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another epic tale of love, destiny, and second chances. Remember, I asked you at the beginning. Tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. I want to know where this story has traveled. Are you listening from New York, London, Tokyo, some small town I've never heard of? Drop your location in the comments. Let's build this community together, connecting across distances through our shared love of these powerful stories. And here's something to think about as you go about your day. Are you running from something because you're scared? Or are you standing still because you're brave? Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is face what terrifies us. Sometimes love is worth the risk. Until next time, may you all find a love as fierce as Hendrick's, a courage as strong as Margriet's, and a bond as unbreakable as theirs. This has been your storyteller, and I'll see you in the next tale.